There's also an article here I want to read about, and it's called An Organic Fairy Tale. It's about perceptions. We've all heard about organic and GM food, genetically modified food. And we don't understand that our words are constantly being changed for us to alter our perceptions. If you didn't alter your perception, what would the food that you were used to having all along until it was not GM? It was just normal food. It was called normal. But if you were to say normal food and GM food, it would be kind of against GM food. So they changed it and called it organic, you see. So normal food's now called organic. And of course it's priced out of sight. It wasn't before, but now it is priced out of sight, so only wealthier folk can afford it. And we're supposed to all eat the GM stuff, the rotten stuff that's being pushed on us, because, as I say, we'll all come down with cancers and various other things. If the insects won't eat this stuff, neither should you. If they're dosing it with insecticide, which is a poison, and the plants soak up the poison, why are you eating it? When you find out that all the tests they did on the GM foods caused cancers of the stomach and intestines of other mammals, why on earth are you eating it? And why isn't it your government's telling you about this? Well, they want you to eat it because it's part of depopulation. I've read up all the articles from the United Nations, and they have a Department of Population, which is population control, and they want the population to come down drastically. Well, how are you going to do it? You're going to ask for volunteers? Of course not. They just step up their inoculation programs that will sterilize you and give you the food that kills you. Now, here's an article here, for instance. It's on bowel cancer. Bowel cancer at one time was incredibly rare. In the 1970s, for instance, they used to list the countries that had hardly any cases of bowel cancer at all. Scotland was one of them. Once the food became really processed and big agribusinesses came in, and of course they would use the normal fertilizers. Again, normal is the word. They would start using chemicals from really leftovers from the war industry. And things look like spuds, they look like turnips, they look like food. However, they don't have the nourishment in them. They grow big, but they don't have all the things you need to live on. Plus, they contain all these carcinogenic chemicals. So, here's an article here to say about bowel cancer. And this is incredible, really. And this is from ABC News. It says here, bowel cancer is alarming rise in young people. It says the science suggests that heavy drinking, lack of fiber, obesity and smoking are all leading causes of genetic abnormalities that could lead to bowel cancer. Now, it's nonsense because these guys at the top know that fewer folk are smoking today than ever before. And meanwhile, the cancers are going sky high. Because they won't tell you the real cause of it, which is GM food. It says Australian oncologists are warning that young people are developing bowel cancer at alarming rates. That was unheard of before for young people. Figures collated by Bowel Cancer Australia over the past 20 years reveal the number of bowel cancer cases found in people aged between 20 and 34 has risen 64%. 64% in 20 years. Surgeons say, here's again, getting it in, of course, the usual stuff. Heavy drinking and obesity could be triggering genetic abnormalities, and they're calling on the government to help promote awareness of the disease. But as I say, people are, it's not that they were always heavy. Young people have always been heavy drinkers until they grow up, if they manage to survive that long. Anyway, Sergeant Professor Graham Newstead says cases in people under 35 are not as rare as they once were. He says the rates of bowel cancer in young age groups are growing at such a fast rate that cancer experts are now urging a new policy approach to catching the disease early. This is something you should start inspecting people in their 60s for. And now it's under 35. Professor Newstead says it could be the result of a number of reasons, but he won't tell you the real reasons. Yeah. And they know what the real reasons are. And he says, in the younger group, he's been very cautious. We think that this is occurring because of a combination of genetic and environmental factors. And these are true increases in what we've been experiencing in the past. So, I give you an example of someone, a 24-year-old woman, who was rushed to hospital, had a stillborn child, and then when they were looking in there, she was informed she had bowel cancer after they took out or gave her a complete hysterectomy as well. But as I say, younger and younger people are getting it. There's even teenagers getting it now. And it says one of the doctors that performed the sigmoidoscopy came to tell us, and she says, look, I'm not an expert in cancer, but I think you might need to prepare yourself because we think it could be cancer. He's meaning of the bowel as well now. We thought that this couldn't possibly be what it is, but then 2 days later when the biopsy results came back, it was stage 4 bowel cancer, which had already spread to liver and lymph nodes. It says, Newstead says leading scientists are still trying to understand exactly what it is that triggers the disease in young people. Well, what's changed? When you didn't have it before, right? And it skyrocketed in 20 years. What has changed in the environment? And of course, what you do know is what causes cancer, definitely established. The first one, of course, is radiation. That will definitely mutate cells into abnormal cells. The second one are certain chemicals that shouldn't be present in the body. That's why they give you radiation and poisonous chemicals when you've got cancer. That's usually to finish you off. But anyway, it says here, we discharge the lining cells from the intestines every 10 days, so the bowel motions contain a lot of dead cells, and every one of those cells has to be replicated, and there are swillions of them, he says. They all replicate perfectly, but just sometimes one cell doesn't. Well, when 60% increase is happening, then something's happened in your intake of something. And of course, what has changed in your intake, we know it's the GM food. The stuff not only is designed to create its own pesticides, it's also able to withstand the heaviest doses of sprayed on herbicides as well. It's soaked up by the plant into its cells, and then you eat it. It's quite simple. It's quite simple. But that is all government's policies. They must promote this GM stuff because it's part of the big agenda. And that's all you'll get eventually if you're just one of the ordinary people. And the so-called organic, which is normal food, is reserved for the ones at the top. And your politicians, you'll get their little ration card to get them into the club. So, really, that's really what they're talking about here. And, getting back to the organic fairy tale, this is an article from the Sovereign Independent. It says, organic is a fraud. Organic is normal food or food that has not been deliberately debased by eugenicists for the purpose of making consumers sterile, sick, and dumb. Dump the term organic and label everything else unfit for human consumption. It is unnatural. Monsanto's staff, the European royal family mafia and their governments, the banksters and the American Senate eat real food. And that's true. Even Tony Blair, when he was trying to foist it off on the British public, leaked out that he mandated that the big massive, they call it cafeterias, like the Ritz, for the politicians to eat in Parliament, but still get organic food or normal food. For themselves, of course. Back with more after this break. Hi folks, we're back and we're cutting through the matrix talking about the so-called organic food, which really is natural food, that's what it really means. And if we call it natural food and then opposed to GM food, then GM food, modified food, genetically modified food would be a nasty thing in our perceptions. And that's why they like to change this lingo to confuse us so we don't think about it, what they're really actually saying. Anyway, this article here goes on to say, it says, the Monsanto staff, the European royal family, mafia, governments, the banksters, and the American Senate eat real food. And it's very, very true. They do eat the real stuff. It says, since the Second World War was upgraded and sent underground, food has been used as a weapon by these creeps on the general population to prevent people from waking up to the existence of their attackers. The genocidal maniacs use their media prostitutes to lie about the population bomb. Oh, population bomb. They've been saying that since the 1950s, even though the populations of the Western world were plummeting, and are still plummeting, by the way. That's why they're bringing so many immigrants, and they're saying that in the major media. At least they're saying that now. It doesn't matter, it's after the fact. And the ones that exist now don't want children. They want to be perpetual teenagers and single. Anyway, it says baby boomers, optimum population, overpopulation, family planning, abortion, euthanasia, the same old worn-out mantra chanted over and over again to try to make us believe we should either exterminate ourselves or make it acceptable for others to do it for us. The only reason for immigration is that for the time For a time, thanks to controlled sterility, there were not enough Western slaves to pay off the national debt to the banksters, and that's what Maggie Thatcher admitted to. So the puppet governments dissolved the borders to allow foreign slaves to flood in and fill the gap. The scam of overpopulation was concocted to justify eugenics through the poisoning of our food. Of course, we, the sheep on the farm, are the last to be told about this culling. Well, we always get nice smiley faces when they're doing the most awful things, and that's how reality is presented to the general population. And I'll put these links up, remember, at the end of the night at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. There's Glenn from Philadelphia. Are you there, Glenn?
Good evening, Alan. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, yeah.
A bit hoarse. I'm afraid of a bit of a contradiction for you on the organic issue. The term organic has to do more with the way a crop is cultivated rather than its genetic makeup. So theoretically, you could have a genetically modified crop or seed.
I know where you're going with this because, again, the further muddied it's true. Because it says organic doesn't mean it hasn't been GM tampered with.
Precisely.
In the beginning, of course, it really meant pure, normal. But then again, they started to introduce the GM and says, okay, but we haven't used any pesticides on it. Now, in fact, now they're even allowed to use.
Historically, organic means that it uses natural sources of fertilizer for nitrogen and nutrients rather than chemically created and pesticides and stuff like that.
That's right.
So that's the purest, in other words, so it wasn't adulterated with chemical fertilizers and pesticides.
Yeah.
So, but here in the U.S., it's a bit of a joke anyway because all these food stores have ever increasing sections of organic foods. But according to the Food and Drug Administration, the food can be like 75% non-organic and 25% organic, and they can still use the word.
I know they changed it a year ago or a year and a half ago. I noticed that, and I thought, wow, Prince Charles has he has about 25 farms with thousands of acres across Britain.
And he owns most of Archer Daniels Midland.
That's right, and then you have the Weston family too that are into Monsanto, Lord Weston. And these characters have planned, they're taking over the whole world's food supply and promoting all the GM stuff for us. But they do have their own private farms across the planet. And their own dairy herds and beef herds. They've even showed you on television, BBC, sometimes where they send the royal chef up before a big party and he picks out the royal Angus there and decides which ones are going to be killed. And these things they've never touched anything that is genetically modified whatsoever. Yeah, it's just astonishing.
But you know what? They're not so invulnerable because when the radiation falls from the sky onto their grazing lands, they're going to be in a pickle just as well.
Well, they're already a bit deformed, if you've noticed. I'd hate to see them in a few years' time.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, they have a tendency to mess themselves up with their stupid eugenics. Anyway.
Yeah. But, yeah. And I talked earlier about the fact that the Ministry of Defense and the U.S. Department of Defense both hired think tanks to project the next 50, 60 years or so. They're both identical. They're on my archives section. And you should go through them because they give you the future. Even down to the population that would suddenly drop around 2030 or so, when we're all crammed in cities, probably due to plagues, they said. It could be starvation on the other hand. And we're seeing all the articles coming out now. Oh, the coming food shortages and rationing will come out soon. And you think it's all just happening the way they're telling you. When 5 agribusinesses now own the entire food of the planet. They can cause it at any time they wish. And they're using, of course, nothing but GM food for you lot, not for the ones at the top. They all have the special farms. Once you get up into the right club, you see, you're given your little ticket, your little real ration ticket where you get real food. And you don't get into the GM stuff loaded with its pesticides, which kill you with cancers and various other things, but mainly cancers. That's why they know that everyone will die of cancer, except themselves. Pesticide exposure linked to lower IQ in children. Now, that's another thing they wanted too. They don't want a bright population during this particular period as we're all supposed to go down the tubes. They want them to be pretty dull, pretty stupid, easily entertained, and so they give them lots of cheap entertainment. And this is one of the tricks that they're definitely using, of course, is to dumb you down as best they can. 3 recent studies have found that children exposed to organophosphates in the womb have a lower IQ at 7 years than those who have not. There's also 3 recent studies have found that children exposed to organophosphates in the womb have a lower IQ at 7 years than those who have not. Indoor use of 2 OPs, that's chloropyrifos and diazonone, known to be neurotoxicants. They actually are toxic to the nerves in your brain, the actual cells themselves, have been phased out over the past decade because of health risks. However, they are still approved for use in agricultural pesticides and are widely used on food crops. Increasingly, scientists are finding that prenatal exposure to pesticides may lead to later health impacts. So, of course, they know all this stuff at the top. They're perfectly aware of all that they're doing to us. Perfectly aware. Then another article, GM food toxins, generally modified food toxins found in the blood of 93% of unborn babies. Toxins implanted into GM food crops to kill pests are reaching the bloodstreams of women and unborn babies, alarming research has revealed. This is one of the exposés that you get in the papers. These are legalities to let you know, and when you say nothing and you don't get up and riot about it, then you've acquiesced, and legally you've acquiesced to poison yourself and your children. No kidding, that's a legal precedent. A landmark study found that 93% of blood samples taken from pregnant women and 80% from umbilical cords tested positive for traces of the chemicals. Millions of acres in North and South America are planted with GM corn containing the toxins, which is fed in vast quantities to farm livestock around the world, including Britain. However, it's now clear the toxins designed to kill crops, pests, are reaching humans and babies in the womb, apparently through food. Well, of course it is. But they're really clever, eh? It is not known what, if any, harm this causes, but they know it's neurotoxic, right? But there's a speculation it could lead to allergies, miscarriages, abnormalities, or even cancer. So it's guaranteed to cause these problems, but more importantly, you have a definite drop in IQ, as well as the last article I had mentioned there. This is all known. This was known, it's known that this stuff would do this before they put it on the market. They test everything for years in the labs on animals and secretly on humans in certain areas too. But of course that's conspiracy thinking. They'd never do that. The same guys that gave you the fake 9/11 terror and terror ever since, and that's what it is, perpetual war and perpetual terrorism to train you, they'd never do that to you. The same guys that are always up there preaching every year at world summits, oh, we got to drastically reduce the population. They'd never do that to you, would they? Of course they wouldn't. No. They're decent guys who go home to their parties with the prostitutes. Wake up, eh? Wake up.